Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this side event by Mission Innovation's Net Zero Compatibility Initiative. The topic for this session is an innovation agenda for global sustainability in the fourth industrial revolution. My name is Jay Hennessy. I am Senior Project Leader for the Net Zero Compatibility Initiative, leading the coordination of our partners from Mission Innovation and beyond towards 60 gigatons of climate innovations. The Net Zero Compatibility Initiative started from our perception of the need to bring together different stakeholders, from innovators and solution providers to those providing funding and investment, with the users who are driving the need for solutions. In these chaotic times that are evidence of the ongoing fourth industrial revolution, the need is rapidly increasing for the identification of solutions that have the potential to avoid emissions in line with 1.5 degree goals. Since 2018, Net Zero Compatibility Initiative has developed the frameworks needed to identify and assess 1.5 degree compatible innovations. At the last Mission Innovation Ministerial, we presented 1,000 innovations with more than 12 gigatons of avoided emissions potential. But the greatest success is that the contributions of the NCI frameworks have been recognized by Mission Innovation members and partners. So today, we have brought together a fantastic group of leading speakers who are driving forward this change in the innovation ecosystem. We welcome them and all of you listening to today's event. And now I would like to introduce Dennis Pamlin, Chair of the event and lead of the Net Zero Compatibility Initiative.
Thanks a lot, Jay. Yes, I'm going to take a step back and put the work that we've been doing in a broader context, because we live in a very dramatic times. And next slide. What we've been doing was, from the very beginning, looking at the potential for transformative change. And I have to say that we are perfectly ready for COVID-19. We knew this would happen. Not COVID-19, but something to that effect, because this is how change happens. Change doesn't happen in a linear sense. Change happens through disruptions. And this is what we see now. And we have really now the choices in front of us. Next slide, please. Because we have, for the last 100 years, basically had a very simplistic way of innovation and putting new solutions on the market. We have this idea that there's a gap, the valley of death, sometimes called, where ideas come to die before they're implemented. But that is based on sort of a lab, technology-driven, and that there's sort of increased productivity in the system. That is no longer the case. Next slide, please. Because what we see now is a new kind of innovation ecosystem emerging, or emerging in parallel with an old innovation ecosystem. And the new innovation ecosystem has a couple of characteristics. I will only mention a few here now, but basically the core part of it is that it's need-driven, as Jay was saying. And this is what we do. We're not trying to see how the current problems should be reduced. That could be done, but the core part of our work is to see the human needs in society, needs for personal growth, for spaces living, for food health. Then you have other things that can help with that, such as mobility and access, etc. But sometimes we take those for granted and say, how can we reduce emissions from cars, instead of asking, do we even need cars? What is a car? What is it that we need access to? How should 3D printing, drones, virtual meetings, play a role in tomorrow's way of providing access to what we need? Next slide. So that is really, for us, the core of what moving forward here. And it can sound very obvious, but very few processes today and very few initiatives today are focusing on needs in society. They tend to be sector-based or problem-based. And of course, those stakeholders have a very strong interest in keeping to what they do. And that usually results in solutions, much more renewable energy, lots more bioenergy, for instance, or let's solve it on this sort of end of pipeline with CCS or even geoengineering. But what we've seen here, and what we will hear more about later, is that the science shows that granular solutions that really focus on needs has the capacity to deliver this on a scale and a pace that really is also helping with other sustainability gains. Next slides. And that has been why we have been focusing really much, not just on the avoided emissions, but to make sure that the new ideas are future secure, that they are driven through a 1.5 low-end demand pathway. And that requires the solutions to have value propositions. It requires them to be leaders, to work in clusters, to be resource efficient, to not have heavy reduction in the short term that results in lock-in. So there's more of a sophisticated framework, but still quite easy. It's just a matter of changing the way you look at the world, from problems to solutions, and from just carbon to resource efficient smart solutions. And that's what we sometimes call the 11 billion filter. Can the solution really work in a world with 11 billion people? If it can, it's welcome as part of the solutions. Next slide, please. And we've done this with fantastic partners. We will hear more about those, but the sort of the expanded innovation space, where we move away from a problem to solution perspective, from existing sectors to needs, is something that UNFCCC is working with. Next slide. The fact that we cannot just focus on the old systems, but also supporting new business models and new solutions and entrepreneurs is also something that's part of the new financial transition work, and that we're working with Unifi and other financial leading stakeholders. Next slide, please. And also as a final examples, also in the business community, leading consultants are now moving away from this risk offsetting zero carbon approach to a solution, a revenue-driven approach, not a risk, compliance, cost-driven, but a revenue, opportunity, innovation-driven approach. And Boston Consulting is one example that we will hear from here later. Next slide, please. So what we hear now, we're going to invite a number of fantastic speakers and actors who's really at the forefront of delivering this dynamic solution leadership. Thanks a lot, and look forward to guide you through this fantastic session. Now we're moving into the segment with really true thought leaders, and not just thought leaders, but action leaders. So now we're going to have a segment with some of the leading people around the world who's actually implementing a solution agenda. And it's a great honor to start with Masamba Teoya from UNFCCC. He's leading a very interesting project on launching a UNFCCC Innovation Hub, and he's going to talk about that and an expanded innovation agenda. So please welcome Masamba.
Thank you, Dennis.
So fantastic to see you here.
No, pleased to be also here to have this opportunity to exchange on the global UNFCCC Innovation Hub.
Yeah, and I wonder if you could just start by giving a short overview of the aim of this UNFCCC Innovation Hub. I think still a lot of people haven't heard about it. It's just recently been announced publicly. But so if you can maybe just give a bit of an overview of the aim of the UNFCCC Innovation Hub.
Thank you, Dennis. The aim of the global UNFCCC Innovation Hub is fourfold. The first is to expand the space of innovation for climate, to address transformative innovations that enable to satisfy core needs through new value chain aligned with the climate goal and disrupting existing carbon-intensive value chain. This does not replace the current innovation framework, which is more based on incremental improvement and is focusing at the production side, but it is complementing it. So the second aspect is, the second aim is to bridge between demand and supply of climate solution by translating, for example, the longer-term low-emission development strategy, the green post-COVID-19 recovery, as well as parties and corporate net zero commitment into current demand for climate solution. It will broadcast to stimulate the development of relevant solution. And then the third aim is to promote integrated approach to innovation by facilitating the formation of cluster, working on innovative technology, policies, business model, financial instrument, and leadership. And finally, to measure the climate contribution of the different cluster of climate solutions with the view to prioritizing their development and their deployment.
Fantastic. And it seems such a natural thing to think about how stakeholders can provide solutions and not just reduce emissions from existing structures around the world. How do you see this playing out, especially with the COVID-19, where the world has really been rethinking how to provide services? Is this a good thing or a bad thing for the Innovation Hub that we have this quite chaotic situation right now?
I think the Innovation Hub can build a lot on what is currently going on, and the fight against climate change can learn a lot from the fight against COVID-19. So, for example, one very important aspect is the fact that under COVID-19, the demand for solution was explicit and clear. And where the demand for solution is clear, the response can be also very clear and very quick to put in place. So it was clear that what was needed is a vaccine. In a very short amount of time, the international community was able to provide a solution to a very clearly formulated demand for solution. So when it comes to climate, this is where we have, let's say, some difficulties, because we do not have a clear demand for climate solution. And most of the strategies that we have, most of the commitment people are making, corporate and parties, are based on what is perceived as being possible, not on what is needed. And the tension between what is needed and what is currently possible is exactly what drives innovation. If you do not have this tension, innovation cannot be supported.
I think that's a very interesting way of portraying it on the needs. And I think that's also where the focus on human needs rather than the emissions is a very strong sort of innovation driver. Because by the end of the day, I think when you presented it, I think it was a very clear message that it's a human face. It's how we can have 11 billion people living good lives. That is the demand that needs to be met, not on how we reduce emissions. So I'm wondering, because a lot of companies are facing up to this now and get really excited because they've only been approached as sources of emissions. And the only thing they think about is how to get down to zero. And if it's difficult, they buy offsets. But now all of a sudden they have an opportunity to think about, how do I provide solutions, and what other stakeholders? Because I've seen cities and I've seen individuals, I've seen governments, really thinking about their new role as solution providers with a clear target. So how do you view this in terms of stakeholders? Because there's been quite a lot of strong focus on the big emitters, but with this approach, there's much more stakeholders that could engage in providing solutions.
No, definitely. With the current innovation framework, the focus is on sector, the focus is on problem. So not only it reduces the type of stakeholders that can be involved, but also it's incremental in terms of improvement. So if you take the framework of innovation differently, focusing on, let's say, the consumption side and the need side, then you will have a new type of climate actor extremely relevant being targeted, like individual citizens. Or let's say, if you take the case of shelter as a basic need, instead of focusing only on those that are producing materials for construction, you will also focus on architects, you will focus on construction companies that can actually bring alternative approach to satisfying this core need of shelter in a way that is aligned with the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement. One important point here is by focusing on the need, you mainstream climate action into the development action. So climate action and SDG action will be done simultaneously in an integrated manner.
I think that was a perfect note to end on. And just maybe end by saying, when will this become public again, so people know where to look for the Innovation Hub?
So we want to launch it at COP 26 in Glasgow, and start proposing challenge so that we can collect both demand for climate solution and solution.
Thanks a lot, Masamba. Always a pleasure. Look forward to further collaboration moving forward.
Very pleased to have this opportunity to interact with you on this very important topic, Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you. So Mission Innovation and UNFCCC will continue to collaborate. And now I'd like to welcome Sonja Stadelmeier-Petro from Allianz, and who's one of the leading stakeholders in the Unifi's Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, and who's working in what I think is the most interesting area, financing the transition. Sonja, welcome. Could you maybe share a little bit with us on your thoughts on what needs to be done here and what we have to look for?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Dennis. And it's a great pleasure, and I'm very happy to be and to speak with you today. So in order to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, I think we all know immediate action is needed to enable and support a global transition to a net zero economy. We're in the middle of one of the biggest transformations in history, as millions of people are already affected by climate change today. And the future generations will bear even more challenges if we don't act now. So for us at Allianz, this means that public-private partnerships are crucial to move companies, sectors, and whole industries towards a decarbonization pathway and provide for a sustainable transition. So this was the reason for us why we have partnered with other asset owners and founded the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance in 2019, which is convened by the UN and PRI and supported by WWF and Global Optimism. The Alliance is steadily growing. We're currently 37 asset owners globally with 5.7 trillion assets under management, delivering on the commitment to transition our investment portfolios to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And although it is important to have a long-term target, the urgency to deliver earlier on this bold target is reflected in a target-setting protocol that we have set for ourselves, and that is due 2025. So Allianz and all other Alliance members have committed to have 5 years targets and publish them to enable measurement of the progress. So Allianz, for example, announced its interim targets of 25% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in listed equities and corporate bonds. And for the real estate portfolio, we want to move the investments to follow the 1.5 degree path by 2025. And all of those efforts are underpinned by engagement, be it with the portfolio companies or be it with the asset managers, to create a multiplier effect, to spread the effort, to spread the word, and involve as many stakeholders as possible towards the creation of real-world impact. So as a long-term investor, we want to mitigate the climate-related risks in the portfolio, but we also see potential opportunities to invest into climate solutions. So for us, financing the transition is an inclusive process. On the one hand, we want to continue providing financing to traditional businesses to help them transition their business models. And on the other hand, to help build climate solutions and finance new technologies. We know from science that about 50% of the reductions that need to happen are going to come from technologies that have not been invented yet. So in order to enable a quicker development of these technologies, we can prepare and we can kind of set the scene to enable financial inflows into those types of climate solutions when they emerge. This can happen in the form of new types of investment vehicles, So for example, blended finance structures where public and private funds are blended to de-risk investments which otherwise may not be in scope of the investors due to their asset allocation, and that they would not fit into the asset allocation. It can also happen by knowledge exchange and knowledge sharing on new technologies with established corporates as well as with startups. And we also think it's important to provide transparency on climate solutions. So at the Asset Owner Alliance, we're working on a digital platform to provide information on climate solutions and pair this information with investment relevant data on risk return expectations, on asset classes that are investable, on regions and other relevant information that is crucial for the investment decision process. So we want to make it easier for investors to support the transition and finance climate solutions. And so with this, I would like to close and call on the private as well as the public sector to join forces and help transition the economy to net zero rather sooner than later. Thank you.
The synergies between having both large businesses transforming business models and supporting new innovative innovation, I think, is a very interesting approach and something that should be, I think, a mainstream discussion on transforming business and really turning business into solution providers. And I think that provides the perfect bridge to the next speaker, Mark Caduso from Boston Consulting Group, who's been leading the thinking together with World Economic Forum and other leading stakeholders on how to make this transformation from a traditional risk approach to a climate opportunities agenda. So welcome, Marco.
Thank you, Dennis, and thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure to talk about this topic and also about the work we did together with Mission Innovation on really basically turning the script of climate action from a challenge to an opportunity. What that means is, first of all, that we have to be clear that the case for climate innovation is there. We know that we need it, as Sonia was saying, to get the technologies that will enable a transition to net zero, but much beyond that, we need it because it's going to be a way that we are going to provide better, cheaper solutions to customers. The climate solution innovation agenda, we require to innovate pretty much across any sector and all sorts of solutions, both across technologies and business models. And finally, I think we have to interpret climate innovation in a broader way, not just on business, but also across all the other enablers from investment models, ecosystems, policy, and also about the mindset of people and entrepreneurship. Where we start today is an approach that has some pitfalls. Connecting to what Massamba was saying, the approach to climate action today really focuses primarily on companies as sources of emissions and therefore on the highest emitting companies. The incentives are mostly aligned around risks and around cost, rather than looking at climate as an opportunity. And in terms of solutions, we tend to focus obviously on the ones that are more incremental and not on the more transformative ones. So in addition to the approach that we have today, we really need to move to an approach to see climate innovation as an opportunity. And that will enable, at the same time, achieving a 1.5 degree target, but at the same time also really creating business advantage and value for shareholders. This value is already very clear from companies out there. If we look at the total shareholder return over the past 3 years of some categories, we know that everybody's been talking in the last year or a couple of years about the returns of big tech. But if we actually look at the return of the first generation of green champions, renewable superpowers, they are at the same level. And if we look at what we are calling second generation of green champions, is even higher. So really, businesses, companies, investors can look at climate action as a source of value creation. As mentioned, we then have to move beyond just businesses. And when we talk about businesses, we look at technologies and business models. We also have to look about all other enablers, from policy frameworks, where obviously you need, for example, mission-driven innovation policy, ecosystems, because we're going to need collaboration across really all parties in order to make some of these technologies develop quickly and then be deployed quickly. We need new investment models with a longer time horizon. And ultimately, we need also an entrepreneurial mindset within organizations, within companies, and in society. Therefore, we do believe that climate innovation is an opportunity to create a long-term business advantage for businesses, for investors in their portfolio, and ultimately for governments who can create business champions. Last point is about the mindset. It will all start with a change in mindset. As was mentioned today, we focus too much on seeing climate and climate action as something limiting and narrowing the opportunity space. We have to change this narrative and really start looking at climate as an opportunity for new solutions and new business advantage. Thank you, Dennis.
Thanks a lot, Marco. It's a pleasure, and I think, again, it's when you look at Sonia and what Musamba was saying, this is what really should be at the mainstream agenda, and it's really fascinating to see how so much of the work still is focused on the pure reduction agenda and getting down to zero as sort of an accounting exercise with offsetting or whatever you have, instead of looking at what's really needed. And as Marco was saying here, as a business opportunity. But maybe most important really is for the next generation, those who really coming to the, stepping up now to see these challenges. And with that, I would like to introduce one of the absolute leaders internationally in this field, Ganesh Das, who together with his team in India set up the first clean energy international incubation center, which is an interesting collaboration between Tata, the Indian government, and sort of broader groups in India on really taking on this challenge. So really look forward to hear your thoughts and present a little bit on your experience on the International Incubator and what you see could be done moving forward. Honored to be here together with you, Ganesh, as always. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dennis. It is very interesting, and when we started off this journey, we didn't look that exciting, but definitely as we have moved forward, we have seen that it is not only something what we have set for, what was our goal, we have really redefined, and the redefinition of the goal has come not only from the perspective of business, but the way the business has to be sustainable. Today, we have got about 25 startups, which include 6 international ones, and then we are going to in the process of getting few more as we move forward. And the interesting thing, what we like really about the way we have started building up this entire ecosystem is the partners. If you look at the larger partners, we have the industry partners, we have the philanthropy coming from the Tata Trust, industry partners, Tata Power Delhi Distribution Limited, and we have the government right at the top, which really supports all the technology innovations from the Department of Science and Technology, Department of Biotechnology, through which funding comes, support comes. And then we have an innovation partner, operating partner, Social Alpha Foundation of Innovation, who focuses on the seed capital and provide all necessary infrastructure to build in. The importance of this aspect is, if you look at this sustainability standpoint, we have got a government who has a very big stake. If you look at India per se, we have got a lot of commitments we have set for our 2030 targets. We have got large companies, we have got trust, we have got the innovative platforms, and this really sets the ball rolling. And the areas of innovation, the areas of incubation is essentially energy, from the area of generation to distribution to storage, edge of the grid into multiple dimensions. And we were really thankful to RISE, Dennis, Jay, and the team at RISE to really look at this with a different perspective, as I mentioned. When we had this first set of cohort coming in, then it was discussed with RISE, and then we did this exercise wherein we identified what is the potential carbon reduction these startups would do. And we were surprised at the result. Then we decided that why don't we make it as a selection criteria? Can we look at looking at sustainability and looking at reduction of carbon as a technology requirement, as we are going to kind of incubate them in our startup ecosystem. Then we built that framework into the system, and then we looked at the possible potential, and then now we are looking to really take this platform to the next level, to cross-boundary innovation platforms through in the space of clean energy. So this was very interesting from an initiative. Now it is actually a framework, and the framework looks at multiple dimensions, looking at the low energy demand devices, looking at the potential renewable resource sources, 1.C, which has been just mentioned here, impact on the market. How do we really see everything together and have a sustainability dimension to the entire ecosystem of creating value through business platforms? And if you look at from the startup's point of view, something very interesting is, if you look at a startup, they are going to either come out with a product or a solution which is totally novel and new, and they're going to get into market by creating new market and platforms. The second is they're going to be a substitute for an already established business practice or a solution or a product. So they're going to at that point in time going to deal with a very strong established player and a market, and they're trying to kind of substitute their product and solution in the marketplace. And the third is replacing a product and a solution in a direct competition in a product which is me too, but coming and differentiating. How do you really differentiate? Can we say that the startups differentiate by using CO2 as a sustainability or kind of a positioning? Can they do by using this kind of reduction framework which they have? So if you look at the demand, then there is a possibility to look at, we have seen a lot of examples from Tesla to Nest, which is essentially looking at energy efficiency. These are all sustainability driven initiatives. Regulations are going to be important. I mentioned government is an important stakeholder. Given the fact that government is stakeholder, the regulatory framework could be very conducive for them to look at that. Developing carbon neutral targets along with the government in attracting investment in this space, which is very sustainable technologies, wherein you have got clean investment also coming in a big way, and the cost. And essentially what we have also seen that when you are sustainable, you also have a very strong opportunity to reduce the cost. And if you look at some of the performance indices, which we thought that it's very important for the startups to look at, carbon reduction feasibility in a given sector, that is going to be a real good positioning for these guys to really put that. Capital efficiency in this sector, value creation potential, and the value creation potential would have a high component of sustainability. And carbon reduction, what kind of an approach, what sort of a CO2 reduction we are going to have, energy generation, sustainable storage solutions, recycling. How do you really shift the entire to move to a less resource intensive business models, including circular economy models and then consumption models, resource optimization through data analytics. That is also a key important area. We have got startups who have got data analytics platform, which can help us to monitor things in such a fashion that we can optimize resources, specifically on the carbon reduction framework. Then active carbon capture and storage. These are some of the aspects which is a real opportunity for the startups, and we are very excited, and it's great to hear everyone speak about that. I feel the ecosystem is going to get very, very attractive for these players to come in and then work on the area of sustainability in a big way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ganesh. It's such a pleasure to see, and I think also people will be surprised to learn that there was only 3 years ago since this was basically launched, and it's just been exploding ever since, and it's been producing both in terms of actual entrepreneurs, but also their international recognition. As you mentioned in one of the slides, that this is now going to be one of the core parts of Mission Innovation moving forward, having an acceleration agenda, and which we in this part of Mission Innovation, but also International Energy Agency and other leading stakeholders are really seeing as an important example. So thanks a lot for this. And I think I really encourage everyone to visit the webpage and follow the work of this fantastic innovation initiative by India and as a multi-stakeholders clear solution agenda. Thank you very much, and look forward to further collaboration. It's been fantastic so far. And now we're moving into the second part, where we actually have the two spectrum of the work that we are conducting. On the one end, it's the intellectual foundation that Charlie Wilson is going to talk about, the actual thinking about how we can find a sustainable 1.5 path forward. The second part is going to be representatives from 2 countries who are really taking the lead of this, in Sweden and in Chile. But we'll start by introducing Charlie Wilson from Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research. Professor Charlie Wilson, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Dennis. So yes, as Dennis mentioned, I'm a professor of energy and climate change, and I'm hoping someone's going to be able to show my slides. There we go. Great. And I want to make 4 assertions based on, sorry, yeah, next slide, please. Yeah. I want to make 4 assertions, all backed by new research I've been involved with. And here they are. Firstly, that more granular technologies, those are ones with lower unit costs and smaller unit sizes, have numerous advantages. Secondly, that cost trends, which we can observe for these kinds of small scale renewable storage and electrolytic hydrogen technologies, oh, sorry, back 1 slide, please, are very helpful for, there we go, very helpful for decarbonisation. And thirdly, that these granular technologies are useful not just for decarbonisation in the medium term, but also for green recovery in the short term. I'll come back to the 4th point at the end. Next slide, please. So here is the initial evidence that I wanted to show you. So each of these graphs that you're observing, the data points is a technology, and they're ordered from left to right, with left being the more granular ones. So there is some, you'll see some examples on the left. We're talking about digital technologies, energy efficiency, end use technologies, and of course, solar PV. And all the data points towards the right of each graph are what we call the lumpy technologies, large scale infrastructure, things like CCS, big hydrogen production, nuclear power, and so on. So if you look at the graph on the left, you'll see that as you move from left to right, so as you move from more granular to more lumpy, the learning rate falls. That is, technology, larger scale technologies improve in cost and performance much more slowly than the more granular technologies on the left. If you look at the graph in the middle, you'll see that as you move from granular to lumpy, you lose employment benefits from new energy investment. So more granular technologies create more jobs. And on the right, you see that as you invest public money in R&D, you get higher social returns from the more granular technologies on the left. Next slide, please. So we see these benefits of granular technologies. And if you look at what's been happening in terms of the cost of these granular technologies, you see that we have been consistently underestimating how fast they've been improving. The graph on the left shows the familiar story that organizations like the IEA have been underestimating the dramatic falls in solar PV. The graph in the middle shows a statistical projection or continuation of historically observed cost trends. Next slide, please. And if you apply this same logic, not just to solar power, but also to wind turbines, to batteries, to electrolytic hydrogen, and to digital technologies, you see, and next slide, please. You see that if you put these into a simple global energy model, there is a dramatic potential for renewable electrification to deliver our final energy needs by 2040, with obviously enormous benefits for decarbonisation. Next slide, please. Now, not only are we talking here about a story to 2040 in terms of progress towards net zero, we're also talking about huge benefits for green recovery, particularly in terms of jobs, social returns on investment, faster deployment, less risky deployment of these more distributed granular technologies. Next slide, please. So what we've done is we looked at the green recovery stimulus programs in 4 countries, France, Germany, South Korea, and the United Kingdom. And we looked at the technologies and infrastructures that each of these countries are targeting in their green recovery packages. So here on this graph, you see ordered from granular on the left to lumpy on the right, all of the stimulus programs. And you see the sort of building technologies on the left, things like solar and energy efficiency tend to be more granular. And the sort of big industry and transport infrastructure investments on the right tend to be more lumpy. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to show you the results from our analysis of 2 of the countries, Germany and South Korea. So in each of these plots, you see the y-axis has now become the granularity axis. So the higher you go up on the y-axis, the more lumpy the technologies become. And on the x-axis, we're showing the cumulative stimulus spend. So you can see both countries have a broadly similar cumulative stimulus spend, but the slope of the South Korean package overall is much more tilted towards the granular end of the spectrum, particularly in the building sector. Germany, in contrast, has gone for larger scale, more lumpy infrastructure investments, which our analysis suggests will be slower to deliver on green recovery objectives. Next slide, please. So the final thing to say is that this story about granular innovation and deployment strategies for climate change and for green recovery is crucially not just about decarbonizing the supply, but also about transforming energy demand, the role of useful services in our daily lives. And we showed in earlier research that this can deliver on the global 1.5 degree objectives without needing to rely on large, slow, risky, lumpy infrastructure. Next slide, please. So this is the final slide, and it ends where I began, with these 4 assertions that I made. And hopefully now, not just have I made these assertions, but I've backed them up with evidence. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks a lot, Charlie. And we can't thank you enough for the work we've been doing. And I think also one thing that you might not have addressed as clearly in this presentation as you've done before is also the broader positive feedbacks also for other SDGs in terms of biodiversity, also resource efficiency. And I think that's a challenge with this approach. It's almost too good in too many areas. And it's in conflict with this. So the only thing that I think is the main challenge here is the complexity. Because I think it's much easier for most policymakers to say, we're going to invest in a big CCS plant, and then everyone is happy because they don't need to do very much. But a granular approach requires a much more sophisticated approach. But some of them have been doing that, and that's the next speakers on this list. And the first one here is a person who, if he wasn't around, we would not be here. And that's Andreas Debelius. And he's one of those people around the world who I think on a personal level have contributed to more innovation than basically anyone on this planet when it comes to really pushing the next generation solution providers, and especially those granular, many small but huge potential, but not these sort of grand scale, very expensive projects, but those who can scale. So without further ado, let me introduce Andreas Debelius to share some of his thoughts and what he's been doing and what he's seeing next on the horizon. Andreas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you for those kind words. My name is Andreas Debelius. I work for the Swedish Energy Agency, and I will talk to you a little just about the way we have attacked these granular technologies and focusing on climate innovation. First, a couple of sentences on the Swedish Energy Agency. We're a governmental agency. We work with almost everything that has to do with energy. Our vision is sustainable energy for everyone. But that basically means that we work with everything that has to do with energy. Everything from green certificates to emission trade schemes, testing washing machines and whatever. But when you see where we allocate our biggest resources, it's in research, development, and innovation. And Sweden, we are always ranked as one of the top countries in the world when it comes to clean tech innovations. We have Clean Tech Innovation Index, European Innovation Scoreboard, and so on. We always rank quite high. And I usually get the question, why is that? And my typical answer is like, well, Sweden has very long-term put efforts in funding in R&D. And just one example I used to say, one of the biggest universities in Sweden is founded the same year as Christopher Columbus discovered the US. So it's really, really based on long-term funding for R&D. And the second one is that Sweden was one of the first countries in the world with a carbon tax during the 90s. And if you translate that tax today into a price on carbon, In Sweden today, it's actually $150 per ton. So, I mean, that is the system where we develop our technologies. And of course, they get clean tech and innovative with those two. Then some people tell me another story. I don't know if it's in competition with the other one, but this one is that the normal average Swede is showering more than people in the rest of the world. And as everyone knows, most of the good ideas are discovered in the shower, right? So that might be an add-on to my first, but this is really interesting. And now I will go into what we have done. So funding a lot of R&D. In 2006, we started a venture team. How can we as an agency focus more on the scalable innovations? And first I will go into the results that we have made, and then I will come with 6 recommendations from me. But first of all, the numbers. We have so far funded 241 startups. 200 of them are still alive, which gives us so far a survival degree of more than 80%. And when it comes to money, we so far have spent $90 million on these 241 companies. And the market value of the portfolio of companies that we have is way over $3 billion. So in terms of money and in terms of survival, we're doing really good. But being the Swedish Energy Agency, that is not our focus. It's a very good and nice side effect, as we heard before, but our focus is climate, right? So in terms of climate, these 241 companies have potential to cut emissions with 1 gigaton. And you know, now we're talking. 1 gigaton is roughly 19 times the annual emissions of Sweden. It's roughly 2% of the world's emissions from a small country as Sweden. And this is through the power of innovation. We can never forget the power in innovation here. So I'll go into my 6 recommendations. So the first one, create a new venture team. We did it in the same way as if you are structuring a venture fund. We have everything in the team from banks, lawyers, the financial sectors. We had entrepreneurs. We have people from business and sales, IPR experts, and international business. And I think creating a really combined team with all those competences was one of the keys. So that's my first recommendation. The second one, make sure that you report to the top level, because you will challenge some of the people in your organization. So you need to report to the top level. That was one of the most crucial things in our journey. The third one, focus on scalability and potential rather than problems and internal goals. And that is one thing that we constantly work with Dennis on. Focus on potential and opportunities. The fourth one, you need to change the mindset. You need to go from funding R&D into funding startups. And this is really something new and special. It's not the same thing to fund R&D in a university as it is to fund innovation in a startup. It's quite the opposite. And the only thing you know for certain when you're funding an innovation in a startup is nothing will be as you thought it will be. That's the only thing you know. So my fifth recommendation, embrace entrepreneurship. This is really hard being a governmental agency, but we need those crazy entrepreneurs that is running 200 miles an hour and never give up and just keep going. So embrace the entrepreneurship. That's my fifth. And my sixth recommendation is have a lot of fun, and this will be great if you're following us. So that's all from me. Thank you, and keep up the good work. Don't forget the power of innovation.
Thanks a lot, Andreas. And I can personally vouch for having fun is something you have working together with you. And it's been a true pleasure, and look forward to the next step on this journey also. The next speaker is it's very similar to Andreas, but from a different perspective. a person I met quite recently, actually, when we started to work in Chile and found some really interesting people there. And Max Correa, who's used to lead the work on the solar work under Corfo, but now is in the Ministry of Energy, is one of the people who are bridging the thinking with the doing. And I've been so fortunate to be able to play a little part in this fantastic work that Chile is doing now. And I think if there's one sort of country on the planet that really represent what we've been talking to over the whole session about a solution approach, it is Chile, with the sun, with the hydrogen potential, etc. And I really hope that people will start to wake up and really see Chile for what it is, really this key player. And I don't need to say anything more because Max will share some of the thoughts and ideas going on in Chile with the hydrogen agenda. Max, you're on the screen. You're more than welcome. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you very much, Dennis. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm always glad to collaborate with the solutions approach, right? With the solutions agenda. So thank you very much again. I will briefly present the National Green Hydrogen Strategy that we launched last year here in the Ministry of Energy. So first and foremost, the climate crisis. And as you all probably know, the energy sector lies in the heart of the problem. It represents more than 70% of the problem, right, of the emissions. So we need to find the solutions primarily there in that sector. And why Chile? Because of our beautiful geography, Chile, our country, was endowed with the most outstanding renewable potential on the planet. All across the country, we have potential to produce clean, cheap electricity, starting from the Atacama Desert with the amazing solar irradiance, down to Patagonia with the best and most persistent onshore winds in the planet. Because of that potential, we are now thinking of harnessing that electricity to produce clean molecules, hydrogen and derivatives. And we believe that we can produce that molecules in the most competitive way on the planet, reaching less than $1.5 per kilo of hydrogen by the end of the decade, which is most competitive to other parts of the planet that they also have deserts and winds, right? But we cannot be blind to the fact that we are far away from markets, but our competitive advantage in the production side is so good that it more than compensates the relative disadvantage of the distance to the ports of destination. So Chile has a real unique opportunity here to become a solutions provider to decarbonize not only our own economy and industries, but also we can help to decarbonize the economies of other parts of the planet as well. And if we are able to do that, we will be creating a clean industry the size of or bigger than the mining industry in the country, which, as you may know, is the most important and biggest and largest part of our economy. We are the biggest copper producers in the world. We have the biggest lithium reserves. But this new industry of clean molecules to decarbonize the nations, not only Chile, it could be even bigger. So that is why we're working very strongly to have at least 5 gigawatts of projects of electrolysis under development in the coming years. and we are very confident that we will be able to reach that $1.5 per kilowatt, dollars per kilo of hydrogen, before the end of the decade. And now we are thinking that we can even reach around $1 per kilo of hydrogen by the end of the decade, which makes that molecule very competitive against diesel and other fossil fuels. So we are now implementing the strategy. We are working in several fronts or work streams. First, we need to reduce the uncertainties. So we are working very fast on having the regulation and permitting system ready. Then we know that there's still a cost gap that we need to bridge. There's a big green premium with the alternative fossil fuels in many applications. So we are working with incentives. For example, we're a developing economy, but we are doing big efforts to have grants and subsidies. A few days ago, we launched a $50 million financing round to give subsidies to early projects. We are working on domestic and international off-takers, right? Because there's a problem of chicken and the egg with hydrogen. So we need to secure those off-takes. And also we are working with the refineries in the country, with the mining sector, with the agricultural sector to produce green ammonia, for example. And also we are working in local value because we need to build a robust, virtuous new industry for the country that brings us lots of value for Chile. So that's our strategy, Dennis, and thanks again for having us.
Thanks a lot, Max. It's such a pleasure. And I don't know if people really notice, but slide number 5 for me might be one of the most important that future generation will look at, because what it really does is moving the sun. It's really looking at the planet from an optimization perspective on how we take care of the resources on this planet. And looking at the world from that perspective it's really the future, I think, of humanity if we're going to live together. So thank you, Max. And we're going to now wrap up the session. And congratulations for great hosting of Mission Innovation's annual meetings, and look forward to future collaboration and getting even bigger numbers and getting people to understand the importance of Chile's role in the transition to a sustainable economy. Thank you, Max. So, looking forward now to the next part, it's really what we want to do is to bring the different key stakeholders together. The solution providers, the investors, the markets, as we've been talking to. So it's really collaborating with UNFCCC, Unifi, different countries, all the ones that are solution providers, to also make sure that we can measure and guide development in the right way. Next slide, please. And for that, we need a new way of thinking. And this is a complex graph, and I will not go into all the details, but it's basically rethinking the innovation ecosystem away from this linear path where sort of an idea in the lab and then years or decades later it's out on the market, to something that is much more dynamic and need-driven. What does humans really need, rather than productivity gains in the economy in old systems? So how do we really rethink the innovation ecosystem? Next slide, please. And moving together, we would like to invite anyone together with us also with 2 specific projects that we're going to focus on in the near future. One is how to really assess what Charlie was talking about, what a lot of the different stakeholders have been working on. What is 1.5 compatible solutions? And the second one is really how can we establish this new solution agenda, focusing on incubators and innovation labs in companies, countries, cities around the world, and really have a strong focus on those stakeholders who are not just trying to improve existing systems, but that really provide the needs of tomorrow's in new, innovative ways. So with that said, I'd like to invite anyone moving forward here now to the Mission Innovation second phase, and with all the different stakeholders and partners we have, and thank everyone who've been listening to this agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you to all the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll agree this has been a fantastic selection of speakers today. We've seen examples of stakeholders leading the move towards an expanded innovation space and towards transformative change instead of only focusing on the risk and reductions in existing systems. We hope you will join us in finding ways to simplify needs-based rather than technology-based identification of innovations. Thank you for your attention today, and we look forward to your contributions.